I think that clock is slightly ahead. 1 minute. You look at, yeah, that one's slightly ahead. All right, it is time and we will get started. So welcome to the Consensus in Blockchain 2 session. We have 4 wonderful talks in this session. So the first talk will be state machine replication among strangers, fast and self-sufficient. The authors are Juan Garay, Agilas Kiagias, and Yu Shen. Yu will be giving us the talk.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And hi, everyone. So I will be talking about this paper, state machine replication among strangers. So let me first start with this title. When we say among strangers, we refer to the permissionless model. And this is a setting which is very different from traditional distributed computing that parties know each other a priori. In this new permissionless model, the parties, they do not have complete information on the set of the parties running this protocol. And more importantly, new parties can join the protocol, and also all the parties can leave the protocol without notifying anyone else. So this setting was unexplored until Nakamoto proposed the Bitcoin blockchain, which is also known as ledger consensus, or as a permissionless variant of the state machine replication problem. And the main goal here is to achieve 2 properties, namely consistency and liveness at a very high level, which requires the parties to jointly maintain an ever-growing transaction log that can process the incoming transactions in a timely manner. While these 2 are the most important defining properties of ledger consensus, in our work, we will consider 3 more interesting new properties, which I will show you. Okay, so the first new property that we will consider is about transaction settlement time. And in Nakamoto-style blockchain, like the Bitcoin, we have the miners, and they will mine the new blocks following the longest chain rule, which means that in order to settle a transaction, then it needs to be appended by sufficiently many blocks. So how many blocks are sufficient? In practice, people will consider like 6 blocks. However, we know in the literature that in order to achieve cryptographic security, which means that the bad events that a transaction gets reverted in the future is negligible, then that transaction needs to be appended by polylog kappa, that many blocks, where kappa is a security parameter. So as you can see here, there's a gap between this constant and super logarithmic. And also, in the permission, like the classical setting, the SMR protocols, they can indeed achieve this constant settlement time. So the first property that we are looking at is this fast settlement in the permissionless setting. And the second property that we are looking at is about fairness. So if we think about this permissionless state machine, then the first question is that who should have access to this state machine? And obviously, the answer is that in order to be able to insert symbols, then the parties need to first insert a special symbol so that it can grant them access. And in the context of Bitcoin, it can be think about like the coin-based transaction, which does exactly the same thing, which funds an address. And if you know the private key of that address, then you can later issue transactions. So with this in mind, we define fairness in this way. So whenever a coin-based transaction is to be introduced, then an honest party should get selected to propose this transaction with probability proportional to a computational power. However, what we know is that Bitcoin is notoriously bad for achieving this notion of fairness. And the reason includes like network delays and also malicious attacks. So we would like to achieve fairness in terms of accessing this state machine. And in our work, we also consider one step further. We would like to achieve this fairness in expected constant time. So in the previous 2 properties, we talk about time. And our third property is actually about the time, about the timekeeping things. So before I talk about the third property, I'd like to first introduce you the timing model that we were using in our paper. And this is kind of like in between the perfectly synchronize the clocks and the asynchronous setting, which the clocks are completely useless. So in our paper, we will consider the timing model, which is called the drifting clocks. You can think about it like the hardware clocks on your laptop, which is kind of like the oscillation circuits that are not perfectly precise in the sense that it will drift a little bit from the real time after a certain period of the time. And we know that if we don't do anything, then these local drifting clocks, they will deviate from each other unboundedly. So in practice, this problem is addressed by this network time protocol, which tries to synchronize the software clocks. And this is captured by the global clock setup assumption. However, we don't like this kind of NTP protocol, which acts like the trusted third party in our permissionless protocol. So we come up with this term self-sufficient to refer to say SMR protocols that can do its own timekeeping under the only assumption that parties have access to their local drifting clocks. And one thing I want to highlight here is that Bitcoin is not designed with this in mind, with this timekeeping things in mind. If you look at the Bitcoin protocol, then you will see that it will just read the software clock to insert the block timestamps. So Bitcoin is not self-sufficient. And I just want to, so here we introduced the 3 new properties, and I just want to have a very brief overview on the previous works that tries to achieve these properties. So for fast settlement, we have this Prism and Ledger Combiner paper, which indeed achieves fast settlement, but only for non-conflicting transactions, which means that if we have conflicting transactions, then the settlement time will degrade to, again, super logarithmic. And this might not be desirable if you consider smart contract or even Bitcoin script. And for fast fairness, there is a fair blockchain called the fruit chain. But again, this notion of fairness is achieved in super logarithmic time. So, and then for the last point, the self-timekeeping things, there's very few work that tries to address this permissionless clock synchronization problem. And we have a paper at TCC a few years ago that tries to solve this problem. But the thing here is that in our TCC paper, we achieved this permissionless clock synchronization in a weaker clock model that I will detail shortly. Okay, so what we do in our paper is that we propose a new permissionless state machine replication protocol that can achieve all 3 properties simultaneously, and I'm going to show you how to do this. So here, first, before I actually talk about our protocol, I just want to briefly go over our modeling. So what we do is that we model the hash function that is used to generate the proof of work as a random oracle. And in our protocol, our protocol is built on top of this proof of work based consensus protocol, and let's call it GKR protocol. And what happens here is that in this GKR protocol, we have 2 mining procedures. The first mining procedure is to build a blockchain which gives you agreement, and the second mining procedure is to mine input messages. And this will give you validity. So if you keep inserting these input messages with proof of work into the blockchain, and then you will get 2 properties, but only after super logarithmic that many runs. So the way that we build our SMR protocol is by first to reduce reduce the running time of this consensus protocol to let it terminate in expected constant time, and then sequentially running the one-shot consensus protocol to build a state machine replication. And I'm going to show you first how to terminate in expected constant time. Oh, by the way, in order for this protocol to be secure, we need this 2-for-1 proof of work primitive to bind the 2 mining procedures of the blockchain and the input messages. So in our protocol, what we do is that we have this M-way parallel blockchain, which means that we mine M chains in parallel, and their mining procedure is binded together using this M-for-1 proof of work, which means that we achieve full independence over all the parallel chains. And this is actually achieved by splitting this random oracle output into M chunks. And for each chunk, it just corresponds to each chain index. And the way that we run this parallel blockchain is that on each blockchain, we will run the GKR protocol that we see previously. What we know is that if we run that protocol and terminate after superlogarithmically that many runs, we will get agreement and validity with overwhelming probability. But here we would like to achieve termination in expected constant time. So what will happen if we run it and try to terminate in constantly many runs? We will know that we will get agreement and validity with constant probability. If we only have one single chain, then this might be useless in the sense that we would not be able to figure out if we indeed achieve these desired properties. But here we have parallel chains, and we have this very nice translation, which means that if we have agreement and validity with some probability on a single chain, then with fully independent parallel chains, we can translate it to the good instances among all the parallel chains. And this is already very good if we have these two good properties on sufficiently many parallel chains, because we can easily get validity. So the problem is for agreement, because, for example, we have a chain that has no security guarantee, and on that blockchain, the adversary, he might be able to kind of like swing the view among honest parties. So the problem of disagreement is actually addressed by running a classical consensus protocol on top of these parallel chains. And this is a classical protocol that we will run on top of the parallel chains. The very high level idea is that we will use each blockchain to kind of like emulate a party in the classical protocol. And I'm not going to talk about the technical details here, but I just want to say that this emulation can be done perfectly, except for the last part, for the oblivious leader election part. So what happens in the classical protocol is that if you are confused, then you do this oblivious leader election, which is usually implemented by some very complicated kind of like verifiable secret sharing. And then you elect an honest leader with constant probability. But obviously, we wouldn't be able to do this OLE things using in the permissionless setting. And we have a paper at last year's Eurocrypt, which gives a very good solution to this problem. So which is very tailored to this parallel blockchain framework. So the thing here is that if parties they are confused, they don't know which value to agree on, then they will just replace their input with the output of the first chain, which is set deterministically. And the very high level intuition here is that with this parallel blockchain framework, the adversary's power is diluted in the sense that while he can actually attack a certain fraction of the parallel blockchains, but he wouldn't be able to select which chain that his attack is going to succeed. And this will guarantee that the first chain, even we set it deterministically, we would be able to have good properties on it with constant probability. And if we additionally run the classical consensus on top of the parallel chains, then we get termination in expected constant time. So if we then sequentially running this fast consensus protocol, then we almost get state machine replication with fast settlement. But we also need one more thing. The one more thing here is that the validity condition of this multi-valued consensus is too weak to get liveness. So we introduce this additional layer of lottery on the king chain, which means that if you are confused, you want to replace your input, then you actually replace your input with the input messages on the first chain with minimum proof of work. And at a very high level, what happens is that the first chain is a good chain with constant probability. And with constant probability, the honest parties, they will mine the input message with minimum proof of work. And this will give you constant probability to include all the transactions. This gives you liveness settlement in expected constant time. And actually, what we do is a bit more complicated here. Because we have to kind of like extend all the parallel chain framework with variable mining difficulties, because we actually want to tolerate the number of the parties changing periodically. And the second thing is that for the new parties that join in the middle, we actually come up with a bootstrapping algorithm, which tries to let these fresh parties catch up, with all the existing parties in this protocol. And this procedure can be done in constant time. This is how we achieve permissionless SMR with faster settlement. So here, then I will talk about how to achieve this fast fairness thing. Actually, it is very simple if we know the trick on the king chain. So the thing here is that if we try to replace our input with kind of like the input message with minimum proof of work on the first chain, then with constant probability, we will select an honest input. And if we try to use this to kind of like decide on a coin-based transaction before every invocation of the single consensus, before every single invocation of our consensus protocol, then we get fast fairness for free, and that's it. And for the last part, I will talk about how to do clock synchronization in this permissionless setting. And recall that what we want to do is that we want our protocol to be self-sufficient to do its on timekeeping. And our assumption is that parties' local clocks, they will run at different speeds. And also new parties can join, the old parties can leave. So the problem here is that if we don't do anything, then without global clocks, they will deviate from each other unboundedly. So which means that we have to periodically adjust the clock so that the clock skew among honest parties that is bounded. And also we would like to report a meaningful time which stays close to the real time to kind of like eliminate the trivial protocols, the trivial synchronization protocols. Okay, so the way that this is achieved is actually it built on top of the TCC paper that we have previously. And this TCC paper is actually a very simple extension of the GKAR protocol, which every time you want to do consensus, you also include your local time into the input messages. And additionally, all the parties, they will locally bookkeep the arrival time of these input messages. So which means that you have a message that it has a timestamp recorded and you have its local arrival time. So the way that you adjust your local time is just by comparing your local arrival time and the timestamp for all the input messages on the blockchain, and then add the median value to your clock, and you get your new clock. What is proved in the previous paper is that this is good for clocks that are imperfect in the sense that they run at roughly the same speed, but this will not work for the drifting clock model, again, for the same reason. The same reason is because we only have one blockchain here, which means that in order to succeed with overwhelming probability, the interval that we are going to do clock synchronization is super logarithmic, which means that with drifting clock model, we already have super logarithmic scale in that interval, which is not good. So the way that is solved is actually by the same trick on the parallel blockchains. That is, we just run this clock synchronization procedure in the parallel and on all the parallel blockchains, and then we try to get a vector of the clocks that are kind of like we will have a subset of the clocks that are very close to each other. However, there are some problems here. The problem here is that we have to do the clock synchronization for every constant interval, and the adversary, he can actually attack the protocol in the following ways. For example, he can suggest some very crazy clock values that are completely unrealistic, or he can suggest some very confusing clocks so that he wants to further deviate the honest clocks. And you wouldn't be able to know which strategy which attacking strategy that the adversary he might want to do. So the way that this is solved in our protocol is that we introduce this approximate agreement into this parallel blockchain construction, which means that we have parallel blockchain, we run that clock synchronization protocol and terminate in constant time. We know that there are some parallel blockchains we don't have any security guarantee. And what we do is that periodically, parties will do the following things locally. They will get to say m different clock values from m parallel blockchains. And what they do is this approximate agreement. So first, they will drop out the largest and smallest elements, which just to eliminate those crazy clocks. And then they will just divide the remaining clocks into chunks, and then select a representative, and then compute the average. So what we prove in this paper is that if you run this on top of the parallel chain, do this synchronization periodically for every constant interval, then you will have honest local clocks, which stays with bounded skews. Yeah. So just to wrap up, what we do in our paper is that we come up with this permissionless proof of work protocol that can do all the desired properties. So there are three things. We can do fast settlement, which means that all the incoming transactions, they are confirmed in expected constant time, and also fast fairness, every every expected constant time interval, we introduce a coin-based transaction, which is selected proportional to the computational power, and also self-sufficient timekeeping, which means that we can maintain bounded skews, even if parties can join and leave the protocol, and even if they run at different speeds. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for the great talk. Any questions? Okay, let's thank you again. Okay. Our next talk is on leader election with polylog communication per party. The authors are Sravya Yanamuri, Kartik Nayak, Ame Bangale, Julian Loss, Chenda Liuzhang, and Sravya. The talk.
Thanks for the introduction. Okay, so I'll start by defining leader election. So in leader election, we have a group of parties and they work together to elect a leader. And we want that the honest parties don't disagree on who the elected leader is. Validity states that with constant probability, the leader should be honest. And termination just states that all the honest parties should output a leader. And so we're not just interested in leader election, we're interested in scalable leader election. So we want to scale to thousands of parties. But we know that for the related problem of consensus, deterministic consensus requires O of n squared messages. And so the way that we commonly get around this, one of the ways is through having one or few randomly chosen parties communicate with all the other parties. But in practice, this creates a bottleneck. And so we're interested in leader election with sublinear communication per party. Okay, and so there's actually already some work that achieves this from Soda 2006. So this very famous work achieves for t less than 1/3 minus epsilon and Byzantine parties, polylog communication complexity per party, all but little o of one honest parties know the leader. It completes in polylog n rounds. It's information theoretic, and it's in the full information model, which just means that there's no secret channels and there's no long-term secrets. So the adversary can see what messages are sent. And so this work inspired a long line of other important works. But it turns out that there's actually quite a major flaw in this work. So what we did in our work is we figured out the flaw in this paper, we outline it, we fix it, and then we present corrected proofs and achieve leader election with the stated metrics. And so to start, I'll describe the approach of this previous work. So in this work, they start by creating this layered network of nodes. And so every two layers in this network are created based on a bipartite graph. So the nodes as well as the edges between those nodes follow a bipartite graph such that the right-hand side has fewer nodes than the left-hand side by a factor of log n. And each node has polylog neighbors. So in this way, we have a layered network where each layer has log n fewer nodes than the previous layer. And so the bottommost layer of this network has parties from the network assigned to it deterministically by one of these bipartite graphs. And then the parties participate in elections up this layered network. And then finally, to the topmost node, we have a single party elected, which is the leader. Okay, and so these bipartite graphs are not just any bipartite graphs, they're actually samplers. So what that means is that they have this special sampler property. So if you look at this bipartite graph here, what the sampler property tells us is that if the left-hand side of this graph has f fraction of pink nodes, then at most delta fraction of the nodes on the right-hand side have more than f plus delta fraction of the pink neighbors. And so I guess what I want you to remember about this is that what this means for their layered network is that up to delta nodes on each layer may be bad. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you remember, I said the layer 0 of this network has the parties assigned deterministically based on one of these samplers, and less than 1/3 minus epsilon fraction of the total network is Byzantine. That means most of those layer 0 nodes will have fewer than 1/3 Byzantine parties, but delta fraction of them will have more than 1/3 Byzantine parties, can have more than 1/3. Okay. In addition, with the creation of this layered network, there's also a communication tree that's created. And this is just using the same edges as what's in that layered network, but just a subset of them. And so every node is the root node of a communication tree. And what this communication tree gives us is a way to pass information about a node down to a specific set of layer 0 nodes, which is called the monitoring set of that node. And this monitoring set is responsible for maintaining information about that node. And we'll come back to this later. Okay, so now I'll go over the high-level protocol. So for each layer in the network, for each node on every layer, first, the parties in the nodes adjacent to it on the previous layer need to learn who is in the other nodes. Because remember, if we're thinking about layer 5, for example, an election to a node on layer 5, a party in one layer 4 node won't know who's in the other layer 4 node. It won't know who won the election. So they need to learn who is in those nodes, and they do this via the monitoring set. And then after learning, so after the parties in B learn who's in C and D, all of these parties can run an election together to elect parties to node A. And then finally, the winners of the election to A are passed down to the monitoring set. Okay, and so this is like a very simple, elegant protocol, but there's a couple things that they have to deal with. So one is they wanted to achieve polylog communication per party, not just an expectation, but yeah. So the way they get this is that, well, notice that a party could actually be elected many times to one layer and then many times from that layer to higher layers. And basically you can't then show that, you can't claim that this party only wins polylog elections and only has polylog communication complexity. So what they do is they say that once a party is elected 8 times to a given layer, then it goes silent for the rest of the elections, for the rest of the nodes that it wins an election to on that layer. So basically here, if it's elected to a 9th node, it won't participate in any elections to the layer 10 nodes adjacent to that, to the nodes on the next layer adjacent to that 9th node. Yeah, so they go silent after winning 8 elections per layer. And then, so another problem that they have to deal with is these bad elections. So recall that I said up to delta nodes per layer could be bad. And what I meant by that is just that up to delta nodes per layer could have many Byzantine parties participating in their election. Okay, and so this is where the problem comes up in their paper. They say, okay, in the worst case, the adversary can choose which polylog n parties win the election to that node. But in this statement, what it's saying is that 1, the target number of parties is elected. So if we want only log n to the 5th parties to be elected, there's log n to the 5th parties who are elected. And also, this assumes that the parties actually have agreement on who won the election. But in fact, when more than 1/3 fraction of the parties participating in an election are Byzantine, there's no guarantees on the election outcome because the election relies on Byzantine agreement. So we can't assume even that there's agreement on who won the election. One party could think it's one group, another party could think it's another group, and in the worst case, every party could think that they're elected to this node. Okay, and so to take this one step further, we found the problem of shadow elections which could occur. So if we think about one of these nodes where many parties think they're elected, and then now these parties want to participate in an election to one layer higher. And so recall that they have to find out who's in the other nodes that they need to participate in the election with. and they ask the monitoring set. And so due to the sampler properties, it's also possible that up to delta nodes per layer can have many Byzantine parties in their monitoring sets, because the monitoring sets are composed of those layer 0 nodes. And so then when one of these parties asks its monitoring set who's in node B and node C, this Byzantine monitoring set could equivocate and say, oh, it's this set of parties. And then to another party, it could say, oh, it's this other set of parties. And these might not actually be the parties who won the elections to those nodes. And so these parties can basically be participating in what we call shadow elections, which are these like fake elections which are occurring in parallel to the real elections. And so the point here is that this load balancing mechanism and the presence of these bad elections and shadow elections are at odds. And so it can happen that the protocol may not terminate because parties can go silent for all the actually good elections that they win because they're participating in many of these bad shadow elections. Okay, and so next I'll go over a few straw man fixes. One, you might think, okay, surely parties should realize that something went wrong from their monitoring sets, but the thing is that up to delta nodes per layer can have a bad monitoring set. And in their work, they didn't show a sufficiently low bound on the number of nodes per layer with a bad monitoring set, nor were we able to come up with one. Okay, another idea would be perhaps reducing the number of bad elections per layer by improving the sampler properties, but this would entail increasing the degree of the network to improve the sampler properties, and so you'd have more honest parties affected by this problem, so it wouldn't help. And then, okay, you could, if you try to stop silencing, well, we already said that that won't work. We need silencing for load balancing. You could try to increase the silencing threshold, but that also won't help because of this whole shadow election problem. Okay, so I'll talk about the intuition behind our fix. So let's say we have one of these bad elections where many parties think they're elected. And imagine there's like a designated set of parties whose job is to learn the election outcome, filter it so that there's one target set of polylog parties who have won the election, and communicate that back to these parties so that only those parties believe they won the election. Okay? Now one candidate would be the monitoring sets. We already said that there's too many bad monitoring sets. But now another idea would be to use groups of monitoring sets. So we know that many nodes per layer can have a bad monitoring set, but perhaps if we take designated groups of monitoring sets, it's less likely that a party has many bad monitoring sets in this group of monitoring sets. And so this is the idea that we use. So far fewer than delta nodes per layer can have bad groups of monitoring sets if we select them in a good way. And what this is going to enable us to do is decrease the number of problematic nodes per layer without increasing the degree of the network. Okay, so the first part of our fix involves getting good expanders. So as I explained before, the layer network that they use in the original work just has sampler properties, which means that from a node to the nodes adjacent to it on the previous layer, there's good sampler properties. And so what we add is now these nodes are also good, that we have a good expander property going up the network. And so what this is going to enable us to do is use a specific set of monitoring sets 3 layers above a node for confirming the election winners. And I'll describe this in more detail. So we added this procedure called election winner confirmation. And the way it works is that if we have an election to a node A on layer L, so these nodes adjacent to it participate in the election to node A, and then they pass the results of the election down to the monitoring set. And now we take the nodes adjacent to A on layer L+1, and then the nodes adjacent to those nodes on layer L+2, and then the nodes adjacent to those nodes on layer L+3, and we consider the monitoring sets of all those nodes on layer L+3. And then the parties in the monitoring set of node A will pass the election winners to designated nodes in this greater set of monitoring sets. And that might sound like a lot of communication, but actually each one of these nodes in the monitoring set of node A only has to pass this information to polylog other nodes. And now, if a party thinks it won the election to node A, it pulls a certain polylog nodes in this greater monitoring set, and it needs confirmation for more than 2/3 of the parties and more than 2/3 of these polled nodes to be considered a winner of the election. Okay, and so what this enables us to do is reduce the number of nodes to which all the parties can believe they were elected without increasing the degree of the network. There's a very tiny increase just to get the expander properties, but it's very small. And so we do this with the expander properties and the election winner confirmation. And then what this enables us to do is to show that the total number of honest parties that go silent erroneously from these bad and shadow elections, plus the ones that genuinely go silent from winning many elections, is sufficiently small on each layer. And then we're able to show that the protocol terminates with high probability. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. We have some time for questions. Quick question. So how did you, what was the occasion that you found out the issue about the original?
Yeah, so we actually wanted to do the same leader election in asynchrony. And so actually we did most of the work. And then in the end, when we wanted to prove that the protocol actually terminates, we realized, because in the beginning, we didn't really understand why they had to do this silencing. And then we realized, oh, you actually really need that. And then, oh, it's not going to terminate. So yeah.
See. Thank you. Let's thank the speaker again. Okay, so the next talk is high throughput permissionless blockchain consensus under realistic network assumptions. The authors are Sandro Coretti, Matthias Fitzi, Agelos Kiaias, Giorgos Panagiotakos, Alexander Russell, and Matthias will be giving the talk.
Thanks. Let me start with a few reasons why vanilla proof-of-stake blockchain protocols have inherently low throughput. One reason is its sequential block production. So you produce a block and then you want to that this block is globally delivered before the next block is produced, at least most of the time, depending on the protocol. Another problem is message bursts. Assume you're in a longest chain protocol and this is your preferred chain, and now the adversary gives you a long fork. And while you're downloading that long fork, you get the block opportunity. Then actually what the protocol tells you is to add your block to the shorter chain because you haven't validated the long one yet. And another problem in proof of stake is that typical protocols give you a winning ticket to produce a block, and then actually an adversary can abuse this opportunity to create and distribute different versions of that block. So if in good faith I accept some block from the adversary and later the better chain contains a different version of that block, and I would need to re-download the new version of the block, and I thus waste bandwidth doing that. And the question the paper is concerned with is whether the throughput of a proof of stake blockchain can reach network capacity. And this answer has already been answered in the positive before for the two standard block protocol flavors there are. One of them is BFD or committee-based. There is this Marine Life series by Denesis and many others that demonstrated some throughput optimal protocols, but they are permissioned. And even if you manage to transform them into unpermissioned protocols without incurring any loss in throughput, the resulting protocols would not give you adaptive security. And then the other flavor is not Nakamoto style. That we have the PRISM protocol by Bagaria et al., which is a proof of work protocol though. And it's analyzed under pretty unrealistic network assumptions. And as pointed out by Noy and others, it cannot be directly applied to the proof of stake world. We prove over the state of art by introducing the LEOS protocol, which is a permissionless, adaptively secure overlay protocol for any low throughput proof of stake consensus protocol, which we call the base protocol. It tolerates any minority of adversarial stake, and you can push its throughput delta close to network capacity for any delta. However, doing that, you incur a latency trade-off multiplicative of delta to the -2. And finally, we prove it secure and optimal under realistic network assumptions by introducing a new network model reflecting this. So how we define throughput is as follows. It's pretty simple. As soon as I get the winning ticket to produce a block, then I can ask the environment, and then it gives me a globally unique block payload for inclusion. This is very idealized because it doesn't really account for possible transaction conflictions. We are fully aware of that, but we defer more fine-grained models to the future. Then to define throughput, we look at the settled unique payloads as provided by the environment over time. And then we say that the protocol achieves throughput with rate R if for any gamma larger than 0, there is some minimal execution time, such that when you look at an execution time of the protocol that is at least as long as this, then the rate of settled such payloads is at least 1 minus gamma times R, except for negligible probability in the security parameter. And then for optimal or near optimal throughput, we look at the ratio of honest stake alpha H. And then we say that the protocol achieves near optimal throughput if for any delta larger than 0, there exists a protocol parameterization such the throughput rate achieved is at least 1 minus delta times alpha H times the network capacity. This accounts for the fact that the adversary may not include any reasonable payloads. Now for the new network model, I give just a short overview of the previous most realistic model, which is due to a paper by Noy and others. They distinguish deliveries of block headers and bodies. Block headers are small and thus can be expected to be delivered to all nodes in the network within some constant delay delta H. But then block bodies are large, so their incurred delays are defined by the ratio of the block size to the network capacity. And then they have this kind of strange network cloud model where as soon as you have a body, you can upload it to the cloud and it immediately appears there. And then from all the block bodies that live in the cloud, you can download those block bodies. But during download, you are limited to download at the frequency of 1 body per delta. So this somehow models a complete network with infinite upload capacity but limited download capacity. In contrast, what we do, we model actually a gossip network, which is the standard network you would use for a permissionless protocol, which is a gossip network with diameter d, and diameter d is just the maximal distance you would find between any pair of nodes in the gossip network. And now we keep the rule that block headers travel at constant delays, but block bodies, at least under good conditions, incur a base delay that now is d times the delay of before, because now the message might have to do d hops over links, and then it has to incur d times that link delay that is the ratio between the block size and the network capacity. But that's not enough yet, because you can also incur queuing due to other messages in the system. For that, we define a global priority order of message of block bodies in the system, or overall, right? And then if you're sending a block body and during the travel time of that block body, some k higher priority bodies appear in the system, then additionally to this base delay, you incur an additional delay that depends on the number of such higher priority bodies, which is indeed k times that link delay. And the intuition behind this is that a higher priority body can delay your body at most once. That's for the network model. Now I'm getting to the protocol. Am I hearing myself? Or what? Oh, strange. Now for the LEOS protocol, what do we do about this problem about strictly sequential block production? We apply the input and also of root chains idea by Garay and others, which is to decouple payload generation from payload ordering or consensus. So what you do, you apply a continuous and concurrent production of input blocks. Those blocks are not linked together, and they contain the ledger transactions. And by having this schedule, you kind of have this kind of uniform network load. And now you apply the base protocol, whose blocks we refer to ranking blocks in this talk. And then those ranking blocks of the base protocol pick up those input blocks by reference. And so what you now can do to achieve good throughput is you just apply this payload generation near network capacity. But on the other hand, you can still run your base protocol at a slow pace, which is necessary for the security of the underlying consensus protocol. What do we do about message bursts? Let's reconsider that situation where you want to append a new block, but not the full chain is downloaded already, right? So you could evidently you cannot append now here as this protocol suggested now, because these missing payloads, they may eventually come or they may never come. That might imply that the ledger state as of now might actually never be defined in the future. And so what we do against this problem is we do not only decouple the payload generation from block ordering, we also decouple payload delivery from ordering. And this is by certifying the availability of those input blocks by stake-based voting. And then, of course, if you have a certificate that proves that that the majority of stake approves this payload, then you know it's in honest possession and eventually deliverable. So what the ranking blocks do, they do not only reference the input blocks, they also include the certificates. And now, if all the certificates are in place, I can indeed append the ranking block without having the full payloads. Now, of course, there's a problem that the base protocol has kind of a low capacity, so we don't want to include too many payloads. So for that reason, we introduce a new type of blocks, which we call endorser blocks. And the role of those endorser blocks is to collect input blocks and group them together such that the voting can happen on the respective endorser block rather than on the individual input blocks. And in that way, we can achieve that every ranking block only needs to include a single certificate. Now we still have a problem, namely that the adversary could just pile up a big bunch of old IBs and release them very late at once, and thus congest the good payloads later generated from being delivered for an arbitrary time, and thus hurting the liveness of the protocol. So how we counter this is that we make IBs expire over time for EB inclusion and for voting, and that we apply a freshest first delivery rule, which is similar to a rule introduced in that Neu et al. Paper. So what does that mean? Assume that I'm sitting on 3 headers, of which the bodies I still haven't received, and they are tied to tickets generated on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then I'm going to download them in reverse order. So I'm going to get the Wednesday body first. And the nice effect of this now is that if honest parties release their IBs on time, as they should, then there is timely delivery and certification, a respective certification will happen. But then for the bad case, if an adversary releases his input blocks late, then this late release has no effect on the delivery times on future blocks. To support this, we need to implement a production pipeline. And for this, we partition the time into slices of some certain length. So every pipeline starts with such a slice, or with every such slice, a new pipeline starts. And always the first slice of a pipeline is responsible for the IB production of that pipeline, and then that pipeline will be responsible to produce a structure such that these IBs will eventually be included in the base protocol. These IBs are produced by a sequence of independent Bernoulli trial, such that if you hold a stake fraction of alpha, your expected rate of input block production is alpha times FIB for some frequency FIB. And this is tuned in such a way that overall stake, the frequency of blocks times the size of the input blocks is close to the network capacity, and it is close by a fraction of lambda divided by lambda plus 1, where lambda is a protocol parameter, and the higher the throughput you want to have near capacity, the higher the lambda you need to choose. And what we now want, of course, is that the good EBs of the pipeline collect all good IBs of the pipeline, such that no good IBs get lost. And for that, we need to delay the EB inclusion by some lambda blocks. And the reason for this is that those lambda blocks between those colored lambda slices between those colored slices offer enough capacity to actually deliver the input block production of all the lambda plus 1 slices of that pipeline before. And that actually guarantees that all the input blocks from this pipeline will be delivered when the the production of the EB start. And then, at least with high probability, and then we need to kind of do the same again, because we, of course, we also want the good EBs to be upvoted. And for that, for some reasons, we need to delay the voting from the EB production by another mu slots, which happens to be in order lambda squared. And this is for the reason that the adversary actually may still release his input blocks very late, namely just before some honest producer wants to create an EB and say that these input blocks are only released to this EB producer and not seen in the wider net now. We need to give the network time to now distribute these late messages such that an EB producer, including those messages in good faith, still has a chance to be upvoted because we guarantee that even those payloads arrive in time. So the effect of this pipeline is that the good IBs get into good EBs and good EBs get upvoted. And for the bad side, we have that adversarial late IB release only leads to some short-term congestion in the network. We need to solve some further problems, namely, we want that good EBs, or that from each pipeline a good EB gets into the base protocol by ranking block pickup, because we don't want to lose any input blocks. But we want this to happen despite of low base chain quality, which means that actually the fraction of honest ranking blocks might be very low in the base protocol. But again, we want to achieve this by only including one single certificate by ranking block. I refer to the paper for that. And another thing I'm not going to discuss here is how we handle block equivocations. And before I conclude, I just give it a short note on dynamic participation. So protocols like Prowls work in the sleepy model. That means they don't rely on the full stake to actively participate in the protocol, but actually the security does not rely on any such level, but actually the only thing it relies on that of those who actively participate, a majority of that stake must be honest. And that kind of contradicts our design in the sense that Leo's voting on the availability indeed requires an honest majority of the full stake. So this is kind of works against each other. So how we can make Leos operate in this model is that under levels of high participation, the protocol provides high throughput, but then should participation drop below a certain threshold, then the throughput of the protocol gracefully reduces to the throughput of the base protocol. So let me conclude. I presented some aspects of the Leos protocol, which is an adaptively secure overlay for any low throughput proof of stake consensus protocol. You can tune it such the throughput comes arbitrarily close to the network capacity. It tolerates any adversarial minority of stake, and it's proven secure and optimal under a new realistic network model. And maybe as a final remark, I want to say that it also works for resources other than proof of stake, especially for proof of work, but it needs some tweaks to make that feasible. That's it.
Thank you, Matthias, for the talk. Any questions? Could you give us some high-level idea of what the tweaks you would need to get it to work for proof of work?
Well, you need to measure work ahead of time such that you can treat work like as it was some kind of virtual stake, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Let's thank Matthias again. Okay, next we have the last talk of our session. It is on nearly optimal parallel broadcast in the plain public key model. The authors are Ron Gillis, Christoph Lenzen, Julian Loss, and Sravia Yandamuri, and Julian will be giving the talk.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. So this talk is going to be on a very important problem that all of you are probably familiar with, and this problem is Byzantine broadcast. So just to recap really briefly, in this problem we have a sender and we have a bunch of receivers. And the goal of the sender is to consistently distribute an input message, let's call it message M, to all the receivers. So you can think of this as a megaphone where the sender just shouts out its message to all of the network. Okay, and of course, this functionality isn't freely available, so we have to construct it. So our goal is to design a protocol that achieves this functionality starting from only pairwise channels. Okay, and for our setting, we're going to assume that we have n parties and they have this pairwise channel connection. Now, the problem is that in this protocol that we're going to try to run, we have a minority for our work, but in principle, even a majority of malicious parties who can try to obstruct the protocol by sending incorrect messages, and this can confuse the parties. And we would like the protocol to ensure that even in this case where we have some malicious parties, the receivers that are honest, remain honest throughout the protocol, can output this message consistently, even if the sender is not behaving well and not really inputting a correct message. And of course, if the sender is honest, then everybody should be outputting the sender's message. Okay, so in this work, we're actually going to focus on a parallel version of this problem where all of the n parties are sending a message at the same time. And you might ask, why is this parallel version important? And the reason for this is that in many applications, this problem actually naturally occurs. For example, in MPC protocols and in secret sharing protocols, we frequently have steps where all of the parties want to send a message at the same time. For example, in secret sharing, verifiable secret sharing, we have these steps where everybody accuses somebody who has cheated, and that, of course, is a parallel broadcast. Now, before I go into what our work is actually achieving, let me actually answer address what makes a protocol efficient. So when we run a protocol in a large-scale network, then we have to assume that the number of parties n could be really large. And in this case, the communication complexity is of major concern. And the communication complexity just indicates how many bits the protocol has to exchange for everybody to produce output at the end of the protocol. Now, we would like our protocol to scale well as a function of the number of parties n. And in fact, the optimal thing that we can get is something around n squared, which of course is better than something which is larger and not optimal, like n to the fourth power. So our work improves on the communication complexity of existing parallel broadcast protocols. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to refine and explain how exactly it improves on this. The model that we work in is the synchronous network model. And in this model, parties have a shared clock. And we have an adversary that can delay the messages that honest parties send to other honest parties over these channels that they're connected with. But the adversary can't delay any message by more than some upper known time-bound delta. And in particular, it can't drop any of these messages. It can also corrupt some of the parties maliciously. And in our work, it can corrupt up to t less than n over 2 of these parties. To continue a little bit, so one thing I didn't say is that the adversary can do this at any point in time. So like at any point in time, it can just adaptively corrupt a party in the network, for example, based on the communication pattern, and make this party deviate from the protocol in any way that it likes. It's also a rushing adversary, meaning that in any synchronous round, it can first observe the communication, the messages that all the honest parties are sending, and then it can select its own messages based on those messages and deliver them in the same round. One thing that we don't allow the adversary to do is to corrupt a party that was honest and has sent a message M, and then take that message back from the network, basically deleting it. So that's something the adversary cannot do, and it can also not interrupt a sending operation where an honest party wants to send messages to different parties in the network. So we assume that the adversary always has to let a party send messages to all different parties if it wants to do so. But other than that, we don't restrict the adversary. Now, we're going to work in a model that is sometimes loosely referred to as the Dolev-Yao model. And basically, this model is allows to model only basic crypto, such as hash functions, signatures, and public secret key encryption, which are compatible with treating them as symbolic objects that don't really have any randomness, but have just very simple input-output functionality. And we're going to only use crypto that is compatible with this very, very simple model. And in addition, we're going to assume that parties generate their own keys, and they post them to a public bulletin board before the start of the execution. And in particular, there's no trusted dealer that generates these keys for the parties. So the pro of this model is that it's very simple, and the crypto that is compatible with it is very efficient. So if we manage to build a protocol in this model, it's going to be very efficient. The downside is, of course, that it's pretty hard to build a protocol in this model because a lot of protocols nowadays use things like threshold signatures or zero knowledge proofs, VRFs, and so on. And those things tend to help to speed up the protocol considerably. Before I keep going, let's introduce some notation. So kappa is going to be the normalized cryptographic parameter size that we're going to use for denoting hashes, signatures, and so on. Lambda is a statistical security parameter, and we would like to have security with probability 1 minus 2 to the minus lambda. N is the number of parties, T is the number of malicious parties, I already said that. And typical values for these parameters here is like lambda, maybe 100, kappa, 256, like a SHA output. And we're going to, for simplicity, assume that n greater or equals kappa, greater or equals lambda. And one thing that I really want to stress here is that we'll be putting in a lot of work to get rid of factors of lambda and kappa, because in practice, these factors matter a lot. Okay, so if lambda is 100 and kappa is 256, maybe if n is in the low order of thousands, those are definitely related in some polynomial way. And so if we can get rid of some of those factors, it will, significantly improve the efficiency of our protocol. And so now I can state our new result, which is a new protocol for parallel broadcast in the Dolev-Yao model, which has resilience against t less than n over 2 corrupted parties, and it has nearly optimal communication complexity, where L is the length of a message, so n squared times L times log n, and n squared times L is basically the best thing that you can get, and so we have this small overhead here. Okay, so let's actually talk about how we achieve this. The fundamental operation that we have to make efficient in any consensus protocol which uses crypto is basically to distribute a certificate. And a certificate is simply a list of T+1 signatures on some message that proves that at least one honest party has signed this message. Now, certificates in the Dolev-Yao model can't be compressed. So because it's just symbolic signatures, they don't have any compression features, meaning that you can think of such a certificate being of size n times the length of the signature. And now, if one party, sends a certificate to everybody else, that will be okay. But if everybody has to do this for some reason, then this will blow up the communication to cubic number of bits, which is too expensive. So we have to make this cheaper. And the idea that we're going to use at a fundamental level to do this is to replace send-to-all operations with gossip operations. So in gossip, basically, I'm telling my message to only a few of my neighbors, and those neighbors in turn do the same. And very quickly, the rumor spreads through the network and everybody learns the rumor, and it only takes about log of n rounds and takes O of n complexity, where I'm suppressing a couple of actually pretty important logarithmic or lambda factors. Now, and I'll get back to that. But one of the fundamental insights here is that this is not possible against an adaptive adversary, because an adaptive adversary can simply observe the pattern of the message spread when the message does not spread very far and corrupt all of the parties who have learned the message before it has a chance to spread through the network, basically eclipsing the sender. And this shuts down the spread of the message, of course. So we'll have to put in a little more work to get something that works against an adaptive adversary. Now, the key idea, which we're going to be extending in this work, is to use a principle introduced by a prior work of mine 3 years ago here, which is basically to leverage the inherent parallelism of parallel broadcast to provide some means of cover traffic to the communication that is going on in gossip. Now, the idea is that because we're running parallel broadcast, we actually can use all-to-all communication because all-to-all communication is n squared, and parallel broadcast inherently costs n squared. So the idea is going to be that we're going to be running n of these gossip instances in parallel, basically one per sender, and we're going to encrypt all of these messages belonging to these gossip instances. And then even an adaptive adversary can't tell which of the encryptions belongs to which gossip instance. And this allows us to perform all of these instances in parallel without the adversary being able to selectively shut down one of them. So basically, that's what I said, they're providing cover traffic to each other. So that's the idea that we used in prior work, but if we do it naively, then it still comes with this lambda factor overhead, which is too costly for us. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to reduce parallel broadcast to binary consensus. I'm not going to be talking about that, but what I will be talking about is how we actually use a novel gossip approach to get this binary consensus in the Doloff-Yau model. Okay, so let's have a closer look at this. Oh, this stopped working. Sorry. Okay. Well, now I skipped ahead pretty far. Good. Now it's working again. Okay. Yeah. So how do we actually get this? We are going to replace the gossip approach that I introduced, which was push-based, meaning that I basically send out my message, push my messages to other parties, by a more refined gossip approach, which I'm going to be referring to as pull-based gossip. So what does that mean? It means that rather than sending out my messages without asking if other parties actually are interested in those messages, I'm going to ask parties for their messages if I don't already know them. So the idea is that I'm only going to be pulling signature indices from signers. So if I don't already know those indices. So by indices, I mean signers with index I signing a message, if that was not clear. So in the example here, the signer or the party here on the left has a signature from signer I. And so now it's asking these parties for signatures that it doesn't already have. So maybe it's asking for signatures from signer 2 and 4, then another party for signatures from signer 2 and 3, and so on. And these parties can now reply, of course, with the signatures that they are holding. In my example here, they are replying with some of the signatures that they have been queried on. So this is pull-based gossip. But if we do it naively, I'm going to construct an example here where a party here down on the bottom row has a certificate on a message M prime that it would like to spread, of course. And I'm going to construct an example where this is not going to work if we just do a very naive approach of this pull-based gossip. So the naive attempt would be to just pull a constant number of random indices from everybody, which you don't already know. So let's try that. So here the party is pulling a bunch of indices, which it doesn't already know. And now it's going to learn a couple of these indices. But the problem is that at the end of this pull step, it will hold only 2 signatures on M and 1 signature on M prime, and that is not enough to construct a certificate in a setting where we have 5 parties, because a certificate in this case might be 3 parties if we have 2 corruptions. Now the issue is that after this gossip step, the party on the left has a signature on M, so it will never again ask for another signature of the same signer because it already has a signature from the signer. But if the second party here signing this message is malicious, then it could have signed M prime as well. And in fact, the party in the bottom row here is holding a signature certificate which contains that signature on M prime. And the problem is that this party will never ask for it, so it will never learn the certificate, and that is an issue. So how can we prevent this from happening? Well, the idea is to augment the pool-based gossip, which I just showed you, with a test. And how does this test help us, and what does it do? So the idea is going to be that we're going to use a test. We didn't come up with this test, but it's a randomized, pretty standard technique from distributed computing, which allows us to test between 2 parties whether those 2 parties are holding the same signature. And the nice thing about this test is that it only takes a logarithmic amount of bits in the length of a signature. So this would be log of kappa many bits. So if we have 2 parties, right, party here P prime on the left holding a signature sigma 2 of M signed by party 2, and a party P on the right holding a different signature potentially, they will run this test to see if they're holding different signatures. And if they are holding different signatures, as in this example here, only then the signature will be transferred. But this leads to a technical issue, which I'm not going to get into, but basically the issue is that for technical reasons in our protocol, it can so happen that parties hold signatures which are syntactically different, but are signatures on the same message. And now before you think that we can just solve this by using deterministic signatures, unfortunately that doesn't work in this case for reasons that I don't want to get into. But in any case, if this were to happen, then I would potentially pull a useless signature because it looks different from the one that I already have. And now let me explain how that can actually lead to an issue that we have to overcome. The issue is that maybe P prime has an almost complete certificate. Let's call that certificate C prime, and it's only missing a signature on a single index. So basically it has T signatures, only missing one single signature. And the party on the right here actually holds a complete certificate. Okay, and this complete certificate has T plus 1 signatures. So in particular, it has one index that C prime is missing. And now a naive approach would be that maybe P prime tests for lambda many random indices that it is missing from C prime per gossip round from the other party. But we can very easily see that all of the tests would now come back positive because all of these signatures might be syntactically different, even if they're on the same message as the messages that are as the signatures that are stored in the certificate C prime. And in this case, the missing index is only pooled with probability 1/n, which is in fact too low. Because if it were only pooled with 1/n, then even if everybody in the network already has a complete certificate C and only P prime is missing a single index from C prime, it would actually take lambda many rounds of gossip to learn this missing index with high probability, and again, that would be too expensive. So we do something slightly more clever, which is that if we're in this situation, which of course the party on the right doesn't know, the party will do the following thing. It will sample O of lambda many signatures from C, and then it will attempt to find a constant size subsample of these lambda many signatures that PI doesn't have. So PI is every party in the entire network here. So it's easy to see that we don't blow our communication budget doing this. But now, if you look closely here, you can see that if we set it up in this way, PI actually pulls the missing index with slightly improved probability up from 1/n, which is lambda over n. And why does that make a difference? Well, because now per round that we can argue that on average, lambda many honest parties learn some signature that they didn't know before from P if they didn't already hold it. Okay, and this happens actually with high probability if we use a concentration inequality like Chernoff. So it happens with the, you can concentrate over the summer of parties who learn something new. And this is something that we can leverage to get our final product of basically distributing this certificate to the network very efficiently. So the idea is to perform an alternating push-pull paradigm where if a party P holds a certificate C, it will first perform the pulling step that I just showed. And initially, while not many parties know any signatures from C, this will let all of the parties learn a constant amount of signatures with very high probability. And then gradually, as the parties learn more and more of these signatures in later steps, it will still ensure that we can push the signature out, or rather pull the signature out, with high probability to about lambda many parties in every step. And this will allow, in every step, to perform a concentration inequality over the number of parties who have learned a new signature that they didn't know before, and perform a push step on only those parties to increase the spread to everybody with high probability. And if we iterate these steps logarithmically many times, then it actually turns out that the certificate that, in this case, P is holding will spread to the entire network with high probability. So that is our approach, and that is how we manage to efficiently distribute a certificate using nothing but plain signatures and probability theory. Now, some open questions would be applying this pool-based gossip trick for the T less than N regime. So this is actually something that we're already working on. Or to maybe improve the round efficiency by running gossip as an overlay in the background rather than sacrificing log n many rounds every time you want to distribute a certificate. Another nice thing would be to extend this to different settings, like the information theoretic setting, potentially improvements to VSS, or even look at the asynchronous model and solve or apply this approach to asynchronous common subset, which is kind of the analog of parallel broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. We have time for one very quick question. Okay, if not, let's thank Juden and also all of the speakers of this session. Okay, next up we have the IACR membership meeting in Corwin Pavilion.